Well, Will Muschamp is kind of taking a step back. We talked about this in the recent past. Here's what Kirby had to say about Will. He said he spent a lot of time around young men in this profession, and he's devoted a lot of really good. He's developed a lot of really good football players. He's shaped a lot of boys into men. He's got a lot of great relationships from the place he's coached. He's spent a lot of time developing those kids, and he wants to be able to see his son. I'll get that in a second. He wants to be able to see his son develop and play. He got to see that firsthand with Jackson here, who did a tremendous job for us. Every day, Coach Muschamp got to go on the practice field and be with his son. I can only imagine what it's like, what that felt like for him, and the satisfaction of seeing his son each day. Now he's got Wit, so this is Wit Muschamp, who's got an opportunity to go to Vanderbilt and play. He wants to be a factor in his life and be with him. That was a really easy transition. I thought he handled it well. He communicated very well with me. So Will Muschamp and Kirby go back a long way. I think they go back further. They don't go back as far as people think they go. But Will and Kirby have known one another for some time. Really, probably the LSU days is when, so the early 2000s is when it probably formed the kind of, that's when I would say it really started with those two. But they could probably answer that better, but they never talk. Will hardly ever talk publicly. At least he didn't when he was a head coach. And that, let me just go back to that. You know, he was the head coach at Florida after a very successful stint as the defensive coordinator at Texas during their national championship year in the 2000s. So then he goes to Florida and takes over a rotting program, a program that was trying to survive Urban Meyer not recruiting for a while, or Urban Meyer just sort of taking a year off in a way and going 7-6 or whatever it was. It was a rough situation. And, I think Will is a better assistant than he is a head coach, but he was, he had his moments as head coach at South Carolina, at Florida. Obviously beating number 3 Georgia in 2019 was a big moment, but his entire 2017 season at Carolina was a big success. The 2012 season at Florida, that was a big success. I mean, Florida's not had a lot of success. 2012 was lately. 2012 was about as successful a season as they've had from Urban Meyer on. I mean, they didn't win the Sugar Bowl, but they were a really good team that year. They just lost, they lost to Georgia, which was a tough loss, and then they lost in the Sugar Bowl. But when I was I almost called it Dreer High School. When Will was at Carolina, his son was playing at the private school over there in Columbia, and there were 2 guys on that team, and one of them was Birch, who went on to play at Carolina, who had gotten into a real big recruiting battle, Georgia and Carolina, over him, and another at Hammond High School. Jeez. And so, Will's son played there, Jackson, who eventually played at Georgia. So I went to, watch Birch and Alex, I can't remember his last name. But, I got to see Jackson play too. And, Will was around some. He wasn't just, that time in Columbia was probably a lot better looking back on it than it felt like at the moment, because he got the ability to watch his son play at a really important level of football in Columbia. It's a small private school, Hammond, a very nice small private school, very nice, and he got to see his other son grow up too. But after he was let go in the 2020 season, as you recall, Bobo took over the last couple of games after Carolina let him go. Will wound up at Georgia. He didn't wind up at Georgia. Kirby wanted him there. And he served a valuable piece of the puzzle for Georgia over, these last 3 seasons. And he won national championship 2 of the last 3 years. And he was working with the secondary during a lot of that time. And when Scott Cochran was essentially not on the staff, Will stepped up and got it done. And, look, he coached the Gators. He coached Carolina, and people, there are going to be people that always say, "Hey, he's not a Georgia guy," and all this stuff. I mean, okay, just like when you play at a place, that's always going to be in your blood. That's just all there is to it. Doesn't matter if they're good or bad. And when Will was at Georgia, it wasn't a great time. I mean, in a lot of Kirby's time, 3 of the 5 years that Kirby was at Georgia, it was rough. I mean, he redshirted in 94. He played his first season in 95. Those 2 seasons, and then 96, basically you could flush the toilet with them. They beat Georgia Tech. That was about it that happened those years. And then 97, a total turnaround in 98. Well, Will was there, didn't even get 97. You know what I mean? So it was tough out there. And that moment in time, I think, at Georgia, and this could come back at Florida and be a big deal in a few decades. I don't know. But that almost, to me, made the Kool-Aid stronger. What I mean by that is, if you played there at that time, you suffered through that time. If you were a fan during that time and suffered through that time, it hardened those people, I think. It hardened them. It's easy to be a Georgia fan right now. They've lost 2 games in 3 years. Like, it's not real tough. It was tough in 2010. It was tough in 2009. It was tough during moments of the 90s. I mean, when that 9 and 10, that was pretty rough. Like, that 2-year stretch was bad. I don't think it was as bad as 2015, and they were 10 and 3 that year. But I think that was pretty rough. I remember talking to Todd Grantham after the Liberty Bowl loss to UCF. Inexcusable to be in that position and to lose that game. And we were just talking after the Liberty Bowl and said, how many Georgia players, how many defensive guys have gone in the first 3 rounds lately for Georgia? And I said, I can't, I don't remember. He said exactly. And his point was, and he was correct, that, he was basically saying, we have not had the guys to produce at a high level. That changed pretty quick in 11 and 12 because they had them or they were coming. Jordan Jenkins, Jarvis Jones, Alec Ogletree, John Jenkins. Those guys, were either extremely young or they weren't there. And they, immediately got there in 11, and things changed, for a huge stretch of run there. From the 3rd game of 11 until the last game of 12, I think Georgia lost 2 games. No, 3 games. That was it in a stretch of 25-ish games. That's a lot of winning. But eventually, everything that happened with Todd caught up with them in 13. They were very young on the defensive side of the ball. That's not happening at Georgia, and Will's one of the reasons why. So, this is meandering through memory lane there, but is Shane Beamer a better coach than Will Muschamp? Has he proven that? I don't know that we can say that necessarily. I mean, when you look at what Will was dealing with, he was dealing with peak Clemson, and he was dealing with pretty good Georgia. He was dealing with both of them at the same time. He wasn't dealing with cascading Clemson, and that's what Shane Beamer's dealing with right now at Carolina, and he's got to do more than he has. But that's a really tough job. I mean, for anybody involved, that shows how good Steve Spurrier is. That is a really tough job, South Carolina, for sure. But I think, Will, one of the best defensive minds in college football, you don't just work for Nick Saban. That's not like just, it's just by happenstance. That happens. That means you know what you're doing. You don't just work for Kirby, right? So he clearly, he's been a part of a staff of at least 3 national championships, and I may be missing 1 or 2 somewhere. At least 3 national championships, 2 at Georgia, 1 at Texas. The coaching waiting thing did not work at Texas. But, Will is a little bit older than I am. He's knocking on the door of 50, or he is 50. His kids are in college, and, I'd want to watch them play too if I were him. And, his son is going to play at Vanderbilt. He could be the starting quarterback at some point up there. And I think, you know, if he's watched Will Muschamp from the time he came home, and I don't blame from the hospital, and I do not blame him for wanting to watch him just go and just be a dad. And that's the thing for Kirby. I always worry about. I mean, obviously I criticize him sometimes. Sometimes I praise him. But like on a human level, I think the thing that I, worry about the most, if you want to call it that, and I worried about this for Mark Richt too. Do these guys get the ability to really be a father and a dad as much, and a husband, as much as they would like? And the answer to that is definitely no. And that's the shame of all of this. So is this worth it? Because the money can't be it. No amount of money makes up for time. It just doesn't, and it probably helps, but it doesn't make up for time. So that's what now Will Muschamp is getting back, is a lot of time to go watch his kid play, and I'm good for him.